How are you, everyone? This is Craig here, and today I want to do a quick webinar to talk about GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, that comes into effect on the 25th of May this year. Now, a lot of people have been asking me, what is GDPR? Does GDPR affect me? What do I need to do to become GDPR compliant? What steps and measures should I be taking within my business? Or is my business too small? Are they only going to go after big businesses, and so on? Now, the thing with GDPR is it affects everybody. So if you have a website, or even if you don't have a website, and you do a business where you get any sort of data belonging to anybody, then GDPR does affect you. If you have an offline business, let's say you just sell stuff at a fair or car boot sale, and somebody gives you their phone number, you are taking data. You have to be aware that you are taking that data, and you will be fined under the GDPR if you do not have certain provisions in place. So I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds there while everyone joins us. This is one of our most popular calls yet. There's quite a few hundred people signed up for this one. Not all clients. I've kind of opened this one up to the public as well, just because it is something everybody needs to know. And yeah, look, I want to give everyone the information that I've gotten. So I'm working on GDPR with a company called GDPRcourse.com. They're a company that they do courses on different regulations and so on, and they've provided me with the data for this course today. So yeah, look, I want to go through GDPR and make sure you guys know everything. So firstly, GDPR, it stands for General Data Protection Regulation. And now we're going to go through the 12 steps that you should take in order to become aware of GDPR and be on the right track to securing your business. So, GDPR, what 12 steps can we take? The most important step is awareness. Number one is awareness. So, with GDPR, you can never really become fully compliant because it's always going to be changing. So, there's no okay, pay this and now you're compliant, or do this and now you're compliant. GDPR is a learning. You gotta learn. You gotta adapt, and it's gonna be ever changing. It's really being aware that there is such a law called GDPR, and being aware of what information and data you hold belonging to somebody who visits your website or comes into your store. It's that data. It's where you have it, what you do with it, how you secure it, and making sure you're aware that it can be hacked and taking the right measures to make sure that it doesn't get hacked. So awareness. You should make sure that decision makers and key people in your organization are aware that the law is changing to the GDPR. They need to appreciate the impact this is likely to have. What we mean by that, you and your staff and anybody handling data within your business needs to be aware that GDPR is a thing. So on my website, my clients' websites, when someone goes onto your website and they type out their name, email, phone number, and a query, if you have an appointment form or any sort of form on your site and they're submitting that, we need to now allow users who are submitting that, we need to tell them where that information is going. So on my website shortly, when someone submits looking for a website or support, there's going to be a little box that they have to tick that says, you've read our terms and conditions, and in our privacy policy, and in there's going to be a part on GDPR now, which is going to say, your data is going to be transmitted to my email. I'm going to download that to my computer where it's going to be securely held on a zip file, because I have a USB where I keep everyone's data, all your data, any client, and it's fully secure. So in order to get into that, I need a fingerprint, I need Google authentication, and I need a password. Now these USBs are quite expensive to buy, but I need one because I do handle quite a lot of data belonging to people. For you and my clients who have websites, that data, so when you get an email through your website to your email address, you need to be aware that now you're handling somebody's data. If they email you and they want to get rid of that data, you have to be able to track that data down and delete it completely, and make sure it's completely deleted, because people now have a right to be forgotten and a right to delete their data. You also need to make sure, if you're handling their email, all their details in your emails, you need to make sure that your email is secure. You know, if you have a Gmail account and your password is password, the chances of you getting hacked are very strong. And then, therefore, other people's data can get intercepted and taken. It can be hacked. So awareness is the key thing. If you do get hacked, it's almost inevitable. Everyone gets hacked at some point. But if you're aware and you know you've got hacked and you can tell people, look, I got hacked, your data might be breached, then you're not going to get in a lot of trouble because you've taken the necessary steps in order to secure that data. But if you do nothing and you don't know what GDPR is and you don't even pay attention to it and you get hacked, you're liable to be fined, and it's a lot of money, and we'll get to that soon. So the information, number 2. So the first step is awareness, okay? You just got to be aware of GDPR and what it means to you, your business, and the data that you compile from your clients. Number 2 is the information you hold. So you should document what personal data you hold, where it came from, and who you share it with. You may need to organize an information audit. So if you do get audited by GDPR or the people that work for them, they're going to want to know what data you have, where it's stored, who you give it to, how you look at it, where it's shared, and so on. So in my case, you guys as clients, and I know some of you are not clients, but as a web developer, I'm going to have information on each of your websites, where you're getting data from, what contact forms, where it's going to, what email address, and so on. But you need to know when you get that data, who sees it? Do you email it to other employees? Do you download it and print it out? You need to know where that data is going and how you're securing that data. It's vital. It's very important. Again, if you get hacked or you get audited, you need to have it basically organized so that you can tell them where the data is, where it was, where it came from, who you gave it to, and so on and so forth. Number 3 is communicating privacy information. You should review your current privacy notices and put a plan in place for making any necessary changes in time for GDPR implementation. So again, that's what I said again in the beginning. On my side, I'm going to have a privacy policy page that you need to click a tick, kind of like what you do when you opt into people's emails, newsletters. There's going to be a privacy policy on my website that's going to explain GDPR, where their information's going, who's handling that information, and what I do with that after. So a little example in my business is when someone applies for a website or emails me for a quote, that data is not stored on my website. It comes straight to my Gmail or my G Suite. I then ring up the client. I keep their email address. Now I store that in my email marketing program. Both of those are highly, highly secure. Again, authentication, passwords, phone. They've got Google phones me with a code just to get in, and they do Google authentication and my password. Then that data, if that person does not become a client, I delete all their data. It's completely gone. It's nowhere to be seen. It's gone. Nobody can get it. I don't need it. It's gone. If you become a client, your data is written down by me on a journal that I have here, because I just never believed that all computers are safe. If it does ever break, I've got everyone's data on a ledger here. That stays with me. I'm protecting that. And then also they're all also in my content management system, which is fully GDPR updated, and they've got a lot of stuff in place to keep all the information safe. It's a third-party company I use that are very secure. So you need to let people know what information you're taking from them and where that information is going after they submit it. Number 4, individual rights. You should check your procedures to ensure they cover all rights individuals have, including how you would delete personal data or provide data electronically and in commonly used format. Again, what does this mean? Earlier I touched on that somebody could email you and say, or call you and say, hey, I submitted a form on your site. I want you to delete all that information. I don't want you having any information about me anymore. People could always do that. It's just whether actually people followed through and deleted it was another thing, or, maybe they didn't know where that data was, what email account it was in, and so on and so forth. So now, by number 2, we talked about organizing your information, knowing what information you have, knowing where it is, where it's kept, who has a copy of it, and so on. That makes number 4 a lot easier. When someone rings up and says, I want my details gone, I want all my data that you have of me deleted, you can then track down where that data is and you can delete it for them. If they want a copy of it, you can electronically send that to them. So you have it all there for yourself. Now, number 5, subject access requests. You should update your procedures and plan how you will handle requests within the new timescales and provide any additional information. This kind of comes down to really everything. I mean, look, we need to put procedures in place. You guys as business owners need to have, like I said, number two, you need to have an audit in place, organization of all that data. You got to have that in place before May 25th, because once May 25th comes in, you are under that new law by having any data or transferring any data or having anything to do with any person on your books. You need to know what to do with that data. So I'll work with you guys on the website side of things. I won't be writing the privacy policies. We can work together and come up with one. I mean, legally, there are sites now where you can get one written. I would recommend getting one written by a solicitor. It is highly important. I may have a solicitor that's going to do them quite cheap. If I can get a lot of clients to come along and get them, so I will let you guys know in an email about that. Now, number 6. Legal basis for processing personal data. You should look at the various types of data processing that you carry out. Identify your legal basis for carrying it out and document it. Again, this comes down to, we need to look at your website, your off-site business, in-store, where you gather data. If you're a gym, you get people's information on paper. If you own a grocery store, you might have a rewards card where you're constantly keeping people's details, what they buy, when they buy, when they shop, and so on. This comes down to just every bit of data you get on people. You need to identify what it is, where it is, how you're storing it, how you document it, who you give it to. These are all kind of overlapping, but you really need to have that data in place. And if you're going to get audited, you need to have all this stuff really organized and ready to show an auditor. Number 7 is consent. You should review how you are seeking, obtaining, recording consent, and whether you need to make any changes. So most websites, including my own, when people fill out the forms, I don't consent them and say, hey, do you mind if I give you a call? I just have a form that says, fill this out and I'll give you a call. So now we need to look at that. I mean, most of my clients' websites have their standard contact forms or inquiry forms or booking forms. Now we need to look at, well, should we be consenting that we can collect that information? I mean, if they're putting it in and they're pressing send, well, we know they're consenting, but should we have a box there saying, hey, can we call you, or do you agree to our privacy policy or our GDPR compliance? That's something we need to look at on an individual basis. So I'll go through that with my clients. Just leave a comment afterwards and then we'll go through that. Number 8 is children. You should start thinking now about putting systems in place to verify individual ages and to gather parental or guardian consent for the data processing activity. So again, this is highly important. This comes down to if you're getting information from children, or you may be getting information from children but not knowing it. So, in my business as a web designer, there's not a lot of children contacting me to buy a website, but I might actually put a box on my site now to say, can you confirm that you're over the age of 16 or you're over the age of 18? I do have some clients I know that have gaming websites and gaming forums and party websites. And they will have underage children contacting them for the latest news about games and so on. So that's something we'll need to talk about. You should put a checkbox on your site and make sure that you're getting parental consent, or you're getting consent that they're old enough to actually be contacting you. I know 1 or 2 gyms that I work with. They do underage classes and teen classes. So yeah, we're going to have to look at getting in place a box that where people can confirm their age or have a parent sign to say that my children can send their data to you. Number 9, we touched on this a little bit, data breaches. You should make sure you have the right procedures in place to detect, report, and investigate a personal data breach. This is really important. So this whole GDPR is in place because of data breaches. A lot of top companies were getting hacked and they were getting breached, and everybody's information, like Halifax in America, you had Amazon at one stage, Yahoo, big companies getting breached, and they never told people that they were compromised. They never told people that their information had been taken by hackers and leaked on the dark web. And now when they got caught, they got fined billions of dollars. Some companies did come out and say, hey, look, we've been hacked, here's who's been hacked, and so on. But not everybody was being transparent with their clients and with their visitors and with their customers and subscribers. So this is why this is being brought in. So like I said earlier about organizing and knowing where your information is, if you are hacked or someone has got into your email account, you can now know, you can set up on Google to inform you if somebody logs in from a different location. As long as you know and you can tell your customers, subscribers, clients, hey, look, there's been a data breach, your data may have been intercepted, then you won't be held liable because you've told them. You've been aware of GDPR. You've put stuff in place. Like I said, it's inevitable that some people will still get hacked. But as long as you have procedures in place to know that you've been breached, to know how to handle that, and to inform people and inform the GDPR office that you've been hacked, there's been a data breach. I'll be working on your website side of things, there won't be any information held on websites anymore on my system. But for those sites that will have to have that, I'll have in place. I'll let you guys know if you've been hacked, what information has been taken. But when that information comes through your website and to you, people's emails and so on, inquiries, you need to be in charge of that. You need to be aware, and you need to have a system in place to know what information you're holding, where it is, if it's being hacked, if it's been compromised, and so on. Number 10, data protection by design and data protection impact assessments. You should familiarize yourself now with the guidelines the ICO has produced on privacy impact assessments and work out how and when to implement them in your organization. This again is awareness, learning. Go onto the GDPR website, learn all about their different privacy impact assessments and guidance and what they're doing. And we need to look at a way to, when to implement that in your business. The time is now. I mean, the time was a couple of months ago, but only now is GDPR becoming more prevalent than in people's minds. So we need to get it done. And look, I'll answer any questions afterwards as well, and I'll help you guys get it in place, but do familiarize yourself. Now, I'm going to share at the end of this webinar, I should mention, I'm going to share a highly important document and course that you guys can take and become very GDPR aware, and I'll share that at the very end, so stay with me. Data protection officers. You should designate a data protection officer, if required, or someone to take responsibility for data protection compliance and assess where this role will sit within your organization structure and governance arrangements. This is not really important to all my clients. I know a lot of them are, you guys are small businesses. A lot of the larger companies I work with, enterprises and companies that hire and employ hundreds and thousands of employees, it's more important for them. They will actually have to hire a data protection officer as a full-time employee within their company who looks over all their data, makes sure everything's being protected, look over all their systems and organizations of the data. If there's a breach, they need to be notified. They need to go through the right doors and notify the GDPR and so on. For a lot of small time websites and one-person businesses, you guys are going to be your own data protection officer. You need to be aware. You need to know where the data is. I've said this many times. You need to know where the data is. You need to know how it's being handled. And if there's a breach, you need to know how to handle that and who to call and who to tell and so on. International. If your organization operates internationally, you should determine which data protection supervisory authority you come under. So again, most of my clients are in Ireland, so go onto the GDPR website, look at who the data protection officer is here. If you get a breach, that's who you need to notify. Right. So this checklist highlights the 12 steps you can take now to prepare for the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which we expect to come into force in mid-2018. So as far as I know, I think it's May 25th. Many of the GDPR's main concepts and principles are much the same as those in the current Data Protection Act, DPA. So if you are complying properly with the current law, then most of your approach to compliance will remain valid under the GDPR. And you can be starting point to build from. And this can be a starting point to build from. However, there are new elements and significant enhancements, so you will have to do some things for the first time and some things differently. It is important to use the checklist and other information Commissioner's Office, ICO resources to work out the main differences between the current law and the GDPR. Over the next few months, the ICO will set out its plans to produce new guidance and other tools to assist preparation. The Article 29 Working Party will also be producing guidance at European level. The ICO will also be working closely with trade associations and bodies representing the various sectors. You should also Work closely with those bodies to share knowledge about implementation in your sector. So a lot of the different organizations like the Restaurant Association, the Bar Association in Ireland and so on, they're working close with GDPR. And if you have any questions, if you're if you're in the restaurant industry or the bar industry, you can call up your local association, and they will, or your local body, they can answer a lot of questions for you if I don't answer them all here today. It is essential to start planning your approach to GDPR compliance as early as you can to gain buy-in from the key people in your organization. You may need, for example, to put new procedures in place to deal with the GDPR's new transparency and individual rights provisions. In a larger complex business, this could have significant budgetary, IT, personal governance, and communication implications. The GDPR places greater emphasis on the documentation that data controllers must keep to demonstrate their accountability. So again, this goes back to, as long as you're accountable, if you have a lot of data on people and you don't care about GDPR, you don't know about it, you don't put anything into effect, if you get breached, you're screwed. You're gonna be fined a lot of money because you're not being held accountable. If you are aware and you put, again, if you get hacked, you are aware and you have taken measures to put procedures in place and be accountable, then you've done what they want you to do. 99% of this is awareness. Compliance with all areas listed in this document will require organizations to review their approach to the governance and how they manage data protection as a corporate issue. One aspect of this might be to review the contracts and other arrangements you have in place when sharing data with other organizations. Again, that comes back to who you share the data with, when, why, who, where. If you're sharing the data through WhatsApp, well, have you got encrypted WhatsApp? Has the person who you're sending let's say you get an email in with somebody, let's say you own a shop and you get an order email in, then you're sending that off to a third party provider to supply that order or fulfill it. Are they GDPR got GDPR compliance or awareness? Or what are they doing with that data? So you just got to know where your data is going, who's managing it, and so on. For a lot of my clients, like I said, small businesses, it's going to be all on you. You're not going to be the only one handling that data. So note that some parts of GDPR will have more of an impact on some organizations than others. For example, the provisions relating to profiling or children's data. So it'll be useful to map out which parts of the GDPR will have the greatest impact on your business model and give those areas due prominence in your planning process. So again, not all areas of this is going to affect you. Not a lot of sites, like even my own, are going to take children's details. So I don't really need to be looking into that in primary, like I don't have to look at that in great detail. So I'm going to focus more on every other bit of data I'm going to take. So let's go through this again. All 12 steps, and we're going to give you a bit more of a summary. Awareness. You should make sure that the decision makers and key people in your organization are aware that the law is changing to the GDPR. They need to appreciate the impact that this is likely to have and identify the areas that could cause compliance problems under the GDPR. It would be useful to start by looking at your organization's risk register, if you have one. Implementing the GDPR could have significant resource implications, especially for larger, more complex organizations. You should particularly use first part of the GDPR's 2-year lead-in period to raise awareness of the changes that are coming. You may find compliance difficult if you leave your preparations until the very last minute. Number 2, information that you hold. You should document what personal data you hold, where it came from, and who you share it with. You may need to organize an information audit across the organization or within particular business areas. The GDPR updates rights for a network world. For example, if you have inaccurate personal data and have shared this with another organization, you will have to tell the other organization about the inaccuracy so it can correct its own records. You won't be able to do this unless you know what personal data you hold, where it came from, and who you share it with. You should always document this. Doing this will also help you to comply with the GDPR's accountability principle, which requires an organization to be able to show how they comply with data protection principles. For example, by having effective policies and procedures in place. Number 3, communicating privacy information. You should review your current privacy notices and put a plan in place for making any necessary changes in time for GDPR implementation. When you collect personal data, you currently have to give people certain information, such as your identity and how you intend to use their information. This is usually done through a privacy notice. Under the GDPR, there are some additional things you will have to tell people. For example, you will need to explain your legal basis for processing the data. Next one. Processing the data, retention periods, and that individuals have a right to complain to the ICO if they think there is a problem with the way you are handling their data. Note that the GDPR requires the information to be provided in concise, easy to understand, and clear language. The ICO is currently consulting on a new version of a privacy notices code of practice. The new version will be published later in 2016 and will reflect the new requirements of GDPR. So, of course, that's already been published. And this is why it's very important, to get a solicitor to go through your privacy policy, and all websites now need to have one. I know before a lot of the websites, we had them on there. Some people didn't want to put one on. Now it's highly important that everyone has a privacy notice on there to be getting towards compliance for GDPR. Individual rights. You should check your procedures to ensure they cover all rights the individuals have, including how you would delete personal data or provide data electronically and in a commonly used format. The main rights for individuals under the GDPR will be subject access, to have inaccuracies corrected, to have information erased, to prevent direct marketing, to prevent automated decision making and profiling, and data portability. On the whole, the rights individuals will enjoy under GDPR are the same as those under the DPA, but with some significant enhancements. If you are geared up to give individuals their rights now, then the transition to GDPR should be relatively easy. This is a good time to check your procedures and to work out how you would react if someone asks you to have their personal data deleted. For example, would your systems help you to locate and delete the data? Who will make the decisions about deletion? So again, this goes down to being organized and knowing where that data is, where to log in, where it's held, and making sure you delete it fully. I hold everybody's data in 2 places, and then I will be easily able to get to that and delete it for you guys. The right to data portability is new. This is an enhanced form of subject access where you have to provide the data electronically and in a commonly used format. Many organizations will already provide the data in this way, but if you use paper printouts or an unusual electronic format, now is a good time to revise your procedures and make any necessary changes. So again, if a lot of your stuff is on paper, you need to make sure that you have an electronic copy of it that's easily readable and in a format that people can open and be transferred to them. Subject access requests. You should update your procedures and plan how you will handle requests within the new timescales and provide any additional information. The rules for dealing with the subject access requests change under the GDPR. In most cases, you will not be able to charge for complying with a request, and normally you will have just a month to comply, rather than the current 40 days. There will be a different grounds for refusing to comply with subject access requests. Manifestly unfounded and excessive requests can be charged for or refused. If you want to refuse a request, you will need to have policies and procedures in place to demonstrate why the request meets these criteria. You will also need to provide some additional information to people making requests, such as your data retention periods and the right to have inaccurate data corrected. If your organization handles a large number of access requests, the impact of these changes could be considerable to the logistical implications of having to deal with requests more quickly and provide additional information will need thinking through carefully. It could ultimately save your organization a great deal of administrative cost if you can develop systems that allow people to access their information easily online. Organizations should consider conducting a cost-benefit analysis of providing online access. So again, a lot of you guys, this won't be too important to, but if you do hold information on someone and they want to change their phone number that you have on file for them and they email you to do so, you have to do it. You can't charge them to change that information. It's just, it's going to be extra work. Or if you provide an area for them to log in on your website where they can update their own personal data, then you're bypassing a lot of the time issue here. Number 6, Legal basis for processing personal data. You should look at the various types of data processing you carry out. Identify your legal basis for carrying it out and document it. Many organizations will not have thought about their legal basis for processing personal data. Under the current law, this does not have many practical implications. However, this will be different under the GDPR because some individual rights will be modified depending on your legal basis for processing their personal data. The most obvious example is that people will have a stronger right to have their data deleted where you use consent as your legal basis for processing. You will also have to explain your legal basis for processing personal data in your privacy notice and when you answer subject access requests. The legal basis in the GDPR are broadly the same as those in the DPA, so it should be possible to look at various types of data processing you carry out and identify your legal basis for doing so. Again, you should document this in order to help comply with the GDPR's accountability requirements. Number 7 is consent. We spoke on each of these briefly, so I'm just going into them a bit more in depth. You should review how you are seeking, obtaining, and recording consent, and whether you need to make any changes. Like the DPA, the GDPR has references to both consent and explicit consent. The difference between the two is not clear, given that both forms of consent have to be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. Consent also has the positive indication of agreement to personal data being processed. It cannot be inferred from silence, pre-tick boxes, or inactivity. If you rely on individuals' consent to process their data, make sure it meets all standards required by the GDPR. So an important thing there, it cannot be inferred from silence or pre-ticked boxes. So sometimes people have a box that's already ticked that says, I agree to the terms and conditions of the privacy policy. You can no longer do that. That way you're waiting for them to opt out. This way, you can't do that anymore. You need to have an empty box where they have to tick. So they can't send their information to you without ticking that box first. If not, alter your consent mechanisms or find an alternative to consent. Note that consent has to be verifiable and that individuals generally have stronger rights where you rely on consent to process their data. The GDPR is clear that controllers must be able to demonstrate that consent was given. You should therefore review the systems you have for recording consent to ensure you have an effective audit trail. So I have developed a new contact form for all of our clients' websites, which will put tick boxes on there, and then we'll also, in the email that you receive, we'll have a whether they verified and tick the box. So therefore you can tell whether they actually did give consent. It will cost, so if you guys want to get in touch with me, I'll let you know the price of getting that contact form onto your website. So children, you should start thinking now about putting systems in place to verify individual ages and to gather parental or guardian consent for the data processing activity. For the first time, the GDPR will bring in a special protection for children's personal data, particularly in the context of commercial internet services, such as social networking. In short, if your organization collects information about children, in the UK, this will probably be defined as anyone under 13, then you will need a parent or guardian's consent in order to process their personal data lawfully. This could have significant implications if your organization aims services at children and collects their personal data. Remember that consent has to be verifiable, and when collecting children's data, your privacy notice must be written in a language that children will understand. So again, I've only a couple of clients, but if you are in the business of getting information from children or targeting children with your services or products, you've got to write your privacy notice in a way that they can read it. So a solicitor, we all know how some privacy policies are written. They're very hard to understand, hard to read, and they're in legal terms. You're going to have to rewrite this for children to understand if you're in the business of getting details from children. Number 9 is data breaches. You should make sure you have the right procedures in place to detect, report, and investigate a personal data breach. Some organizations are already required to notify the ICO and possibly some other bodies when they suffer a personal data breach. However, the GDPR will bring in a breach notification duty across the board, so for all businesses. This will be new to many organizations, so a lot of small-time businesses, individual businesses, including my own business. If I get breached now, rather than tell you guys, I need to now tell the ICO and other governing bodies. This will be, so not all breaches will have to be notified to the ICO. only ones where the individual is likely to suffer some form of damage, such as though identity theft or a confidentiality breach. You should start now to make sure you have the right procedures in place to detect, report, and investigate a personal data breach. This could involve assessing the type of data you hold and documenting which ones would fall within the notification requirement if there was a breach. In some cases, you will have to notify the individuals whose data has been subject to breach directly. Directly. For example, where the breach might leave them open to financial loss. So if you hold credit card information belonging to someone and there's a breach, well, they could lose financially, so you'll need to notify that person directly. Larger organizations will need to develop policies and procedures for managing data breaches, whether at a central or local level. Note that a failure to report a breach when required to do so could result in a fine, as well as a fine for the breach itself. Now, the fines, the GDPR are going to fine up to 20 million, or I think it's nearly 25% of your yearly turnover. So this can be a big impact on small businesses. So we got to make sure we've got everything in place for this. Number 10 is data protection by design and data protection impact assessments. You should familiarize yourself now with the guidance the ICO has produced on privacy impact assessments, or PIAs, and work out how to implement them in your organization. This guidance shows how PIAs can link to other organizational processes such as risk management and project management. You should start to assess the situations where it will be necessary to conduct a DPIA. Who will do it? Who needs to be involved? Will the process run centrally or locally? It has always been a good practice to adapt the privacy by design approach and carry out the privacy impact assessment as part of this. A privacy by design and minimization approach has always been an implicit requirement of the data protection principles. However, the GDPR will make this an express legal requirement. Note that you do not always have to carry out a PIA. A PIA is required in high-risk situations, for example, where a new technology is being deployed or where a profiling operation is likely to significantly affect individuals. Note that where PIA or DPIA, as the GDPR terms it, indicates high-risk data processing, you will be required to consult the ICO to seek its opinion as to whether the process and operations complies with the GDPR. Again, a lot of my clients are not going to be affected by that step in great detail. 11, data protection officers. Again, this is for large organizations, but in smaller organizations or a lot of my clients, this is going to be you. You're going to be your own data protection officer. So you should designate a data protection officer if required, or someone to take responsibility for the data protection compliance and assess where the role will sit within your organization's structure and governance arrangements. The GDPR will require some organizations to designate a data protection officer or DPO. For example, public authorities are ones whose activities involve the regular and systematic monitoring of data subjects on a large scale. The important thing is to make sure that someone in your organization or an external data protection advisor takes proper responsibility for your data protection compliance and has the knowledge and the support and the authority to do so effectively. Therefore, you should consider now whether you will be required to designate a DPO and, if so, to assess whether your current approach to data protection compliance will meet the GDPR's requirements. So again, this is where you need to be aware. You need to have systems in place. You need to organize all your data, and we'll go over that again in great detail. If you guys ask me some questions, and we'll be going through that on the private Facebook group. Number 12 is international. If your organization operates internationally, you should determine which data protection supervisory authority you come under. The GDPR contains quite complex arrangements for working out which data protection supervisory authority takes the lead when investigating a complaint with an international aspect. For example, where a data processing operation affects people in a number of member states, put simply, the lead authority is determined according to where your organization has its main administration or where decisions about data processing are made. In a traditional headquarters branches model, this is easy to determine. It is more difficult for complex multi-site companies where decisions about different processing activities are taken in different places. In case of uncertainty uncertainty over which supervisory authority is the lead for your organization, it would be helpful for you to map out where your organization makes its most significant decisions about data processing. This will help determine your main establishment and therefore lead supervisory authority. So guys, that's the 12 steps, okay? It's quite a lot to take in. I would recommend checking out the GDPR website and, becoming more aware. What I've showed you there, you guys can get a copy of this PDF that I've shown you to go over it in more detail. But look, for a lot of you guys, the main thing is just being aware of GDPR, knowing that it is coming into effect. It is going to, no matter how big or small your business is, it is going to affect you, and it is going to, you are going to be liable under it. If you have a website with me, which 90% of you guys will, we need to work together to make it more, like I said, you can't be fully compliant, but we can take the right actions to make it more compliant, shall we say, or, have a lot of the boxes ticked. Like I said, I will be offering privacy policies with a solicitor. I'll get you a price on those. If you want to have a contact form and update your site to be more GDPR compliant, I'll let you guys know the cost of that. But also what I want to do is, I'm just going to put a link on the screen here now. I've signed up with GDPRcourse.com, a large company who are doing a course in GDPR, okay? For any of you guys that are stuck or want to know a lot more, there's a 45-minute course, okay, that you can take. And I've got it. It's usually a couple of €100 to take, but I've gotten them to give licenses for €50. So each of you guys, for being a client of mine, can get a license for €50. You can get as many licenses as you want. It's €50 license. If you do have other employees that need to have a certificate to say that you are aware of GDPR and you've taken a course to significantly improve your knowledge of GDPR and your processes and so on, then you buy a couple of licenses. I put the link on the screen there now. If you go to this link, sign up, take the course, you're going to get a certificate that says you are aware of GDPR, you've gone through a lot of steps to educate yourself on GDPR, and it will be great to have if there ever is a data breach or somebody, you get an audit, you can show them this and show them that you went through this course, you are aware, you've made the necessary steps, and let's document everything that you do. Thanks, guys. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, pop them below. There's a lot of you online right now. I've got close to 1,000 people online. I'm sure thousands more will see this video when I upload it. So let me know what you guys need. Message me on Facebook, email me, let me know. Thanks, guys.